I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Can we have an approval of the minutes from November 5th?
So moved.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? None. Thank you. At this time, if there's anybody in the audience has new business that's not on the agenda, I see a hand up in the back. Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. Well, the goats are back. Actually, the goats never really left, but the controversy has returned. A recent Massachusetts Land Court decision that was published, parts of which were published in the Salem News the other day. There's September of 2018, I was in this room when lawyers McCann and DeLuca went head-to-head in front of the ZBA, arguing the language for the zoning bylaw for animal husbandry. And there was enough ambiguity in there that the person that owns the goats decided they wanted to take it to Massachusetts Land Court to get that kind of cleared up. And in the Salem News, there was part of the ruling, and I quote, "On the parties' cross motions for summary judgment, the court finds that while it may not have been they may have not made the same decision as the building inspector and the ZBA, their interpretations of the bylaws is not unreasonable and requires the court's deference." So I'm asking if the board, along with the town manager and town council, come up with a warrant article for February special town meeting to remove the ambiguity in that bylaw. So going forward, we don't have this same situation again where the town expends time and money to defend the language. I know there's quite a bit of perspective on both sides of the issue, but at the end of the day, the bylaw was approved by the voters through their duly elected representatives at town meeting. So I think that's something that we should uphold and strengthen. So.
Thank you, and I agree, it does need to be looked at, and it will be, but not for February special town meeting, more likely a May town meeting.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? New business? Hearing none. Thank you. The board will consider an appointment to the Danvers Affordable Housing Trust. Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have a candidate, Kristen Teipert, here tonight to introduce herself to the board. And I won't steal any of her thunder. I'll let her introduce herself.
Welcome, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. My name is Kristen Teipert. I've lived in Danvers for about 20 years. I am the senior real estate paralegal for the law firm of Gilmore & Gilmore in Danvers. As such, I am responsible for title searches, identifying title issues, clearing title issues, as well as making sure that all transactions conform to the contract as written. So I'm very interested in the affordable housing issue in Danvers and would very much appreciate you appointing me on the board.
If I could add to her bio, she'll also be back before this board at the first December meeting, graduating from our very first Citizens Academy. So she's part of the inaugural Citizens Academy class.
Yes, that's
Very
been
good.
a very,
Congratulations.
very educational program. It's been great.
Good. David, any questions?
Nothing, thank you.
Bill?
No questions. I'm glad to see you're getting involved in the town more and more.
Thank you.
Following your in-laws and outlaws, it's very good.
Yes.
Gardner?
No, Kristen's been before the meetings we've had. She's come to our meeting, and we've been fortunate on the Affordable Housing Trust to have experts in building, experts in banking, experts in real estate. We did lose someone with a connection to the legal profession, and so Kristen's relationship to that profession is helpful, gives us a unique insight that we may not recognize being laymen in other professions. So the board's supportive of her appointment as well.
Very good, glad to hear that. What's the will of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept the application as presented.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, congratulations, and Mr. Collins is prepared to swear you in
Thank you.
person, right here tonight.
Okay, thank you very much.
Which is good, we have a meeting tomorrow night.
That's why we expedited it. What are you doing out there?
Yes, so?
You gotta go get his Bible?
Did I do that? Do you have to swear in the Bible?
No, just have to put your hand up and affirm, you don't have to swear.
I remember when the new members of Congress got sworn in, you would pick your own book.
So we'll move along. The board will consider a request by Deep in connection with the holiday festival. Mr. Town Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome.
Put you on the spot, sorry. Welcome, please
you.
introduce yourself and tell us
Good
what you want to
evening.
do.
Thank you for having me here tonight. My name is Angela Sumas, and I am the Secretary of the Danvers Educational Enrichment Partnership, also known as DEEP. I am one of the co-chairs of the downtown holiday tree lighting that we're having this year. Last year, DEEP had taken the lead in planning the annual holiday festival. This year, DEEP, along with Danvers Cares, have joined together to run this year's celebration. It will be held downtown on Saturday, December 7th from 2 to 5. As part of the celebration, many of the downtown business owners would like to be able to put tables in front of their businesses. There are also a few other Danvers business owners who are not located directly in the downtown area that would also like to participate in having tables downtown. On behalf of DEEP and Danvers Cares, I would like to request the selectmen to consent to have permission to allow the downtown business owners to be part of this great family-oriented celebration by allowing them to put tables on the sidewalks downtown.
Thank you. Gardner?
I have no questions. I enjoy the festival.
David?
I think it's a good idea. It's just, will the police department or
We have-
Public
yep.
Works look at the proposed layout and approve it?
Yep, we have met with them already. We have everything in place. We just need your blessing.
Sounds great.
Bill?
I have no problems. I love this event. It's nice.
Very good. What's the will of the board?
Make a motion that we accept the application of DEEP as presented.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Aye. Good luck. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
You're welcome, you too. The board will hear from candidates for an appointment to the Beverly Airport Commission. Mr. Town Manager?
Stepped out.
Stepped out.
Oh, he did, okay. Snuck out, okay. So I believe we have 3 applications, and I'd like to confirm that Judy Mars is here. Raise your hand, thank you. Matthew Moiser, thank you. Mark Zuberik. Okay, thank you, so all 3 are here. So what I'd like to do is ask each of you to go to the front, introduce yourself, and briefly tell us why you would make a good member for the Beverly Airport Commission. And Judy, could we start with you? Go there. Go there in the middle, yep. Smile for the camera.
It's just something that I would like to do. And since I've been in travel my whole life, I feel this would be something that would fill up my retirement years. And I think I would be good on that. I think I would know what was going on there. I just visited today, see the size of it, and I have some ideas, but I'm not ready to tell them yet.
Okay. Members of the board would like to ask any questions? Bill?
I have no questions right now.
Gardner?
Just wondering, is there any specific issue you'd like to address with the airport? Is there, concerning its operations? I was a former airport commissioner, and quickly understood that it's about land management. It's, you know, everything in the air, off the ground, is the FAA. Everything on the ground, the land management, the buildings, the rentals, the businesses, the operations, the safety on the ground is all the Airport Commission. So is there any specific thing that you'd be?
So the commission does not get involved with the air, anything in the air, is that right?
Once they're off the ground, that's the FAA. They do participate in noise reduction and flight directions and things of that nature to minimize impact on the neighborhoods, but particularly the tower operations, the flights themselves are all governed by FAA or the Mass Aeronautics Commission. So I didn't know if you had a particular interest that was driving you to come, or it just sounds like you have a general interest?
Just a general interest, since travel kind of has been my background, and I find it interesting, the airplanes and so on and stuff. That's all it is.
Thank you.
David, questions?
No, thank you, and thank you for responding so, Judy, thank you for responding to Ian Freitas, and that was very helpful.
Okay. Matthew?
Good evening. My name is Matt. I go by Matt Moser. Live over on Prince Place. I've been a resident of Danvers for about 30 years. I'm very interested in working with the Airport Commission. I'm a licensed pilot, own an airplane, which I currently keep at Lawrence, actually. My particular interests are in maintaining fair access for all of the different aviation communities and businesses. Trying to keep up the efforts to be a good neighbor. I know airports generate noise and other concerns, so I think they've made a lot of positive steps, but there's always room for improvement.
Very good. Questions, David?
Nothing, thank you, and thank you, Matthew, for your letter and sharing with us your areas of interest and responsibility.
Great.
Very helpful.
Gardner?
Same question, just is there any particular interest or general interest? You did explain some of the points that you're concerned.
Yeah, I think that the airport is definitely an asset to both Danvers and to Beverly. I'd like to see it continue to be that way. I know that financially, the airport, I believe, is still self-sufficient. I'd like to see it stay that way. I'm also a big believer in fair access. I know there's conflicting, there will always be conflicting desires for use of the facilities and the land. I'd also like to be involved in the master plan, which I understand is in process at the moment.
Thank you.
Bill?
Could you explain or enlarge a little bit about your background as a community volunteer that you've had over the past many years?
Yes, so I've been a member of the Historic District Commission since 2001, I believe, so 18 or 19 years, which has been an interesting experience. I grew up in New Jersey and found when I moved up here, the difference in historic preservation was pretty amazing. There's very little left in New Jersey, and here there's a little bit of history everywhere you look, and so I've enjoyed working on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Good afternoon. Mark
evening.
Zubrek, Precinct 7. I would like to just address several issues that I had brought up to your attention. As in my letter of interest and introduction, public service over the last 30 years has been a passion and has provided me a sense of gratitude and satisfaction of the quality of life we enjoy in the town of Danvers. The quality of public input to the varied organizations, committees, and commissions is a reflection of why Danvers is a desirable community. A qualified and informed resident appointed to the Beverly Airport Commission will add to the coexistence and improvement of relations between the town of Danvers, City of Beverly, and the Beverly Airport Commission. As you may already know, Danvers negotiated a second seat on the Beverly Airport Commission in 1997 after a tumultuous town meeting discussion on the payment of real estate taxes. I was there to support the agreement to expand the number of seats at the table. At that time, the second seat provided a more significant voice for the residents and neighbors in Danvers. As you all know, Beverly Airport is owned primarily on Beverly land, and it is called Beverly Airport. Now it is the time for me to participate as a commissioner and represent the Danvers residents. The Danvers commissioners, too, are a minority representatives who are responsible for preserving the quality of life while cooperating with our majority commissioners from the City of Beverly. Beverly Airport will always be there, but we should work to coexist to make the airport viable while protecting and defending the quality of life for the Danvers neighborhood adjacent to the airport. 160-some acres of land are in Danvers as part of the airport. My qualifications reflect various airport projects that I have participated in or managed. I understand the value of experience and qualifications and can add value to the airport while representing Danvers residents. I have dedicated many years to public service and am ready and willing for an appointment to the Beverly Airport Commission. My experience is varied. I've worked on airports internationally and specifically at Logan Airport, rebuilding the international terminal. We did that work for over 3 years, and I was the manager for the construction manager at that time. So all I ask is that you consider my experience and my qualifications, that I can add value to the residents of Danvers by representing them as a commissioner at Beverly Airport.
Thank you. Questions, Bill?
I think that you have expressed your past contribution to the town, which is one of the factors that I wanted to bring out from the candidates. Beyond that, I'm satisfied with what I've seen here in your application and your presentation this evening.
Thank you. Gardner?
I'll be blunt, I can't support your application. You have a history of actions and acumen that lead me to believe you don't support my views as a selectman, recent activities at the airport. Also solidify that. And I can't see that you would be a collaborative influence on the board. Thank you.
David?
Just a question, Mark. Are you a pilot?
No, my daughter and my wife are pilots.
Really?
Yes.
I took 3 lessons, and the 4th day I canceled the lesson. Couldn't do it anymore.
I took one lesson in Linden, New Jersey, where he took me up, and I came down, and I said,
Stayed down.
not again.
Me too. And I have a question for you, but I should have asked the others. Is there any interest of anybody in having the airport named the Danvers Beverly Airport?
It cannot be. It's primarily, the land is in Beverly. So that issue has been discussed in the past. And going back to the amount of years of service, public service to the town, I go back into the 90s with your father, who initiated me into the politics of Danvers.
A good mentor.
Yes, he was.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. So all 3 of the candidates, thank you very much for sending in your request, your interest. Thank you for coming tonight and speaking to us. I really appreciate your willingness to serve the community. But this board needs to make a decision on who to appoint. So unless the board has any other questions, I'd accept a motion.
I'd like to move we accept the application of Matthew Moser, if I'm pronouncing it properly, as the, to recommend to the city of Beverly the appointment.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Matt, thank you. Congratulations.
And just for clarity for people who might be watching, Mr. Chairman, just to remind people, ours is a recommendation to the city of Beverly. They themselves will vet the applicant and make their decisions accordingly.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. The board will conduct the annual tax classification hearing. Mr. Town Manager?
Ronnie, do you want to hit the first light? Thanks.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, please introduce yourself for the folks at home.
Steve Poulos, Chief Assessor and Chairman of the Board of Assessors.
Welcome.
So just real quick, is there any clarification on any of the information I sent out on Monday with the changes that anybody needs? No. All right, so we'll get right in. Fiscal year 2020 tax classification hearing. And tonight, what I will need from the board is for you to vote on the following, the top, well, actually all 5 individually. You'll be looking to select the minimum residential factor, or otherwise known as a commercial, industrial, personal property shift, selection of an open space discount, whether to grant or not a residential exemption, or grant or not a small commercial exemption. I'll also be asking the board to vote to give me authority to sign on their behalf on the DOR gateway of the LA5 form. So similar to what we did last year, after we conclude this classification hearing and the board votes on the first 4 items, I'll go back and fill out the LA5 electronically, print it out, bring it back for the board to review, and you can confirm that it was filled out as you voted on the shift, and then you will print and sign it, and then I'll scan it and upload it to the Department of Revenue for their records. All right.
Can you navigate their website all right?
Can I navigate it?
Yeah,
Yes.
good.
Unfortunately, I can't. I spent enough time on it. As long as it's Internet Explorer, they're the only place that I know that only supports Internet Explorer. If you call up Google Chrome, nope. Firefox, nope. Only Internet Explorer. All right, so for FY20, we have 77%, like all years, majority residential, 2% personal property, 4% industrial, 17% is commercial. So here we put together a couple charts for you, so you can look at the historic distribution of values. So this is basically similar to what you saw on the previous slide in the pie chart. What this is here over on this side here, you have a list of the residential, commercial, industrial values broken out, and then their percentage and contribution to the totals. And so you can see here that, you know, in FY20 here, the values that we just recently got certified, you're at 23% for commercial, industrial, personal property base. Interestingly enough, very close to where it was in FY 2007, which would have been the market peak right before it crashed. So if you look at this chart here, you can see this top band in blue is the residential values. You can see the climb up to the 2007 peak, or FY 2007 peak, and then decline into the recession. And obviously we've climbed and exceeded those values. But I think the other takeaway here of this chart is in the red and purple, you can see that's the commercial, industrial, and personal property in its relation to how much of the total valuation it makes up. It's very, very stable. It's not shrinking, and it's growing, you know, gradually. You just don't have the fluctuation that you do. Obviously, the economy has a much larger impact on the real estate market, both on the highs and lows, which is why you get these wild shifts in valuation. A little bit more on the valuation change. If we break the town into classes, there's 5 classes, as noted by the Department of Revenue. You have residential, open space, commercial, industrial, personal property. Oops, sorry. Those are listed right over here.
Could you remind us again what personal property represents?
Yeah, personal property is the property that a business owns that's needed to conduct business, depending on how it's structured corporately. You, like, we'll give you an example of manufacturing. If the state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, deems it a manufacturing corporation, then we can't tax the machinery that they use to produce or manufacture those goods. If they weren't a manufacturer, then we could. The machinery that they use, you would be taxed. And similar to certain different types of corporate, like an LLC corporation, dictates whether you can pick up inventory or not as personal property.
Thank you.
Which is why we had the big bump in growth last year. I don't remember, but Total Wine, if you remember, but Total Wine came online, and we had that big bump up in growth due to that. The way they have it structured, they're out of Delaware. We have the ability to tax our inventory as personal property.
Steve, may I ask, please?
Sure.
The cars in the various dealerships throughout Danvers, are those taxed as personal property?
No. Nope. Yeah, it all depends on how their business is structured, like
Okay.
corporate.
And then the second question, of the more than $5 billion worth of property in Danvers, does that include the tax exempt properties like the Prep and Mass
Nope.
General? And
No, when I talk about valuation and changes, I'm only talking about the taxable portion. The tax exempt portion is changed in proportion to what, if it's a residential type, if it's a single family home that happens to be owned by a tax exempt entity that doesn't pay real estate taxes, we still adjust them. It's just in the same way we would the person next door who has the single family house who is taxable, but the values aren't reflected here. This is just shown because we want to show the impact to the taxable base, so that when you show the impact of what portion of the levy that each class is going to pick up, you want to be able to look at just the taxable portion, because the non-taxable portion would throw off those figures.
And are you able to identify the total value of tax exempt properties in Danvers?
Yep.
Whether it's Essex Aggie and
Yep.
the Prep and Mass General and all
Yep.
of those? Do you have that figure?
I think it's just under $1 billion, like 900.
Under a
Yeah.
billion?
Yeah.
So that if there was some taxation consequent, some contribution to tax from those properties, conceivably, it could reduce the property and business taxes by a substantial amount in Danvers.
Yes. That's
Okay, I think the town manager is continuing to work on that.
I wish him luck.
Steve, before you move off this slide, I'd like
Yeah.
to make an observation as well.
Yeah. Well, all right.
Were you
But go ahead.
were you
Whatever.
going to? Go ahead.
No. I was going to keep talking, but what's the observation?
I'll wait. We don't want to spend too much time going back and forth. Why don't you finish what you were starting, and I'll jump in if you don't touch on it.
Really, just an overall, how I went through the different classes of property, 5 classes of properties. You can see here, the changes, 6.3%, 5.7%. This industrial change of the negative 1.7% is the shift. So basically, if you look at Locust Street, I think this might be what Steve is going to talk about, is it went from an industrial type property to a mixed use of residential and commercial. So the value that was once allocated in here, it's a little misleading that it looks like we adjusted all the properties down 1.7%, but what it was a shift of value from here to here, but it's a much larger class, so you don't see that much of an impact as an overall percentage.
Steve, with a mixed-use property, do you split it out, the commercial versus the residential piece, into those 2 categories?
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
The short answer is yes. And then I just threw this in here, kind of a piece to take a look at. We always talk about the average assessed values. Again, kind of shows them follow the real estate market. Condo and single families, very closely tied. Commercial industrial a little bit flatter, some upticks there. The overall change, we noted in average assessed values was a little more than 5% in all classes, condos, single families, and commercial industrial.
And I was going to mention 20 Locust, and the only thing I would add to that is that, up through the December 2017 town meeting and starting really in the thousands, there's been a policy effort to rezone the I-1. So you would expect to see a shift over time from the industrial column into residential and commercial as the mixed-use projects start to get built. So to the point Steve was making, if you were looking at the slide with no context, one could assume that the industrial parcels at the beginning and the end of the year had depreciated in value when there's movement within those columns based on what's being redeveloped in town. So we don't typically see industrial replaced by industrial. It typically is replaced by either residential or commercial.
So as you move that industrial into commercial and residential, the impact on the residential increases because you're adding to the value.
That's correct.
But the residential base also increases, so it's impacted by a couple of different variables as it makes the shift.
Yeah, the whole base, right, the base, yeah.
Right.
That's what I thought.
Yep.
Any other questions on this slide? So new growth, something we talk about a little bit every year. Budget for about $600,000. This year, the total new growth was for FY20, certified new growth is $840,083, and that's in tax dollars. So what this chart is trying to show anyways is the reason why the board continues to recommend the $600 growth number is that every peak that brings us over the $600,000, you can name it. So you're basically banking on every year you're going to have one of those peaks. And in 2017 we just barely cleared the $600,000 mark due to the fact that there wasn't one of those peaks, and it could happen again. And due to timing, that could be stuff on the books, but depending on construction schedules and the Department of Revenue's dates when we're allowed to collect growth, we have a snapshot on that June 30th date of status of construction. You can't pick it up after that. So if there's a delay of construction or they get held up in permitting, even though we know it's coming down the pike, you don't know when it's going to come online as far as the tax rules are concerned. So if you look at this peak here in the residential portion, this was Kirkbride. You can see as Kirkbride's getting built up, it ramps up, peaks in 2015, and it slowly tapers off as they finish out the project. And then we have here, this is when Abiomed completed their first two phases, the two major phases, and that's what peaked it here. And then we have this peak down in personal property in 2019, which is Total Wine, which I mentioned earlier. 2020, look what we have. We had a pretty good year with all three classes kind of kicking in. And then this I threw in here to kind of show when we talk about new growth, we're talking about where's it coming from. If we take personal property out of it, which is basically just inventory and equipment turnover, computers and such, where is it coming from? So you can see here that the single families and condos make up, and this is stated in valuation, not tax dollars, but single family and condos make up a huge portion of it. Multi-units, as they're getting built out, usually what happens with the multi-units is they'll get built and added into the tax rolls as a multi-unit, whether it's a 4, 5, 6 unit building, and then it'll get sold as condos, and it will convert over to here. So we have to go by what the legal status is on January 1st. So if it's a multi-unit dwelling, but it doesn't have a master deed filed, it'll be picked up here. So this is really what you're seeing here. This will likely mostly be condos next year that contributed to the growth, because once you break out 5 individual ownership interests, it's worth more than just one multifamily dwelling. We got land subdivision here, and then commercial, commercial industrial making up about 12 and 11% respectively. Everyone's familiar with Proposition 2.5, I think, but this is kind of a little snapshot about how it works and how growth plays into it. So right here, this is the year we're in, FY '20. So if you take your prior year levy limit, do FY '19, just multiply it, simply multiply it by 2.5%, gives you this amount. Then you add in that $840,000.83 that we did last year, and this is gonna give you your new levy limit, which is the maximum allowed levy limit. And we don't have, Danvers doesn't have any debt exclusions or operational overrides, so that's why that's 0 there. If we did, it would give you the ability to add further to your levy limit, giving you a higher maximum allowable levy. And so here is what we're currently estimating the budget to be, which the difference between this and our maximum allowable levy is about $22,000, which would be considered excess levy capacity. In this slide, you do not have, but I put this in right at the last minute, like 5 minutes before, because I thought it could add to your conversation when you talk about the shift, so I can bring this back up. But just quickly, what this is it's a history going back to 2007, which is the last peak. And just so when you're looking at it, we have what the history was on the commercial, industrial, personal property shifts. What we have is this is a percentage of tax levy being picked up by each individual class. This is a percentage of valuation. So if you can look in 2019, you're at the 67, 32, 76, 20, 23. So you see the difference in value is only 23% of the value, but it's 32% of the commercial industrial. And then, interesting, I actually just realized this when I was putting it together, but in 2007, you were in the same place as we were in 2019 with a 1.4 shift and an almost identical allocation between the classes. I thought that was kind of interesting.
That wasn't an accident.
I'm sure it wasn't. All right, now we get into the open space discount. We talk about this every year. This is a discount that's allowed under law, Chapter 59, Section 2A. This allows the board to vote. Let me preface this with saying that we don't have an open space policy, which would be something that if the board wanted to explore, it'd be something that the Board of Assessors would put into place that could be reviewed by the Board of Selectmen. But if they were to go down that route, this would allow you to grant up to a 25% on any residential property. And what it is it's to encourage the land to stay undeveloped. But what the only town in Massachusetts that still uses this that I'm aware of is Bedford, and I actually used to work there. And what we realize is that what most communities have gone away from it because of is that there's no teeth in it. There's no back taxes owed. There's no, you don't get into an agreement saying you're going to keep it undeveloped for 5 or 10 years. It's just basically if it's undeveloped in this tax year, you get the 25% discount. If you leave it undeveloped next year, you get another 25% discount. And the way that money is picked up is you apply all your discounts and then you recalculate the residential rate with the same tax levy that would have been allocated, with the same amount of tax levy dollars that would have been allocated to it based on the shift. So what you have is the reduction in taxes comes by way of a lower tax rate. A higher tax rate for everybody else and a lower tax rate for the open space.
Steve, wasn't that in the past the way it was written? There were no parcels in Danvers that qualified, but there has been a minor change in the legislation such that 61A and 61B can now be included in it, of which we have, I think, 5 parcels in town.
Yeah, well, 61A, 61B are different than this. Which is why kind of was that the question?
Well, I mean, in the past, we didn't have any parcels that qualified, but now there are 5 parcels theoretically in the town that could qualify for
61A and 61B.
And 61B. I think they're all 61As though.
Well, they're already in chapter land.
Yes,
Is
they
that what
are.
you're saying? Yeah, so chapter land is a far more advantageous tax break than this would, so basically you're a 25% reduction. 61A is like $180 per acre.
Yep.
Which is probably like a 98%, 99% reduction. So it's certainly a much better deal and that's why, but it also affords the community to have, right of first refusal, some payback taxes, and you gotta maintain a forestry plan for 5 or 10 years, and so it's kind of one hand washes the other, where this is just a straight discount, and it doesn't seem to retain any undevelopment. Residential exemption, this is a shift within the residential class, similar to open space. What you do is, and what it effectively does is it shifts the tax burden from the homes below the average value onto the homes above the average value. So, and why it's called a residential exemption, and it works in communities like Boston, Somerville, Cambridge, is because it works out better because they have such a large percentage of housing stock that's rentals, so they don't qualify for the exemption amount. Or like down the Cape, where you have these communities where in the wintertime, the population decreases by like 75% because all the homes are rentals. So in that case, where you have such a large proportion that don't qualify for the exemption, it makes sense to, because you're effectively shifting the rate up. You're applying an exemption to all the properties, but you're shifting the rate up, and the break-even point is that average assessment. Small commercial exemption. This is one that's used sparingly in the Commonwealth. Its intention was to, benefit the small commercial businesses, but what was quickly found out and why it's very rarely used is that what it does is it benefits the landlord, the landowner. If you go to a strip mall where you have 10 really small businesses that would qualify for something like this, the likelihood is none of those 10 own the building, and the tax breaks weren't then passed down to them. So with that, we conclude my presentation portion of the classification hearing. I'll need the board to vote on these 5 items. Have your discussion. I'll bring this back up.
Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Gardner?
Thank you. It's the 14th year doing this, and going to be the same kind of discussion. First of all, a split rate is there's no inherent reason to do it. There is no specific, definable, defendable reason that businesses should be charged more than the residents. This is a historic issue, came well before this board, any member on this board, and we can't put that genie back in the bottle. It's gone. If we were to go back to 1.0 classification, where everybody pays the same rate, then we would increase a single residence by 30% while reducing commercial industrial by 22%. And I'm working off of the information you gave us. And actually, I'm going to pass this out to board members. If you want to play along at home, this is what I'm going to be referring to.
Copies up there.
Yep. So that ship has sailed. We're not going to go back to 1.0 at this point. I would never advocate that. Another model is stay where we are. If we stayed where we were, then we would increase residents by 14.77% and commercial industrial only by 9.16. That would be the long blue row on your chart. We've fallen into a pattern of often looking at even though the value of property in town, as you've shown, is a 77%, 23% split, we've fallen into trying to, I don't want to say justify, but at least create an equilibrium of 66-33 split when it comes to taxation. And we've done pretty close, just tenths or of a percent off each time, and tried to say, okay, let's try to make it as stable as possible. Let's go with 66-33. If we do that, that would force us to a rate of, if we went with that model, that would force us at a rate of 1.42 coming up. That would be the pink line that you'd be looking at. Because if you look at the chart, what's not obvious is you see a residential number, and that's 66.66. The remainder is commercial and personal property, which equals the delta 33%. Then the one that I always, the other two that are not really embraced is tax to the max. We've never wanted to tax to the max. Because that would be 1.50. Even if we tax to the absolute max, we're still increasing the residential rate 10.77%. Just no matter how you slice this, residents are going to go up. There's no way in our ability to tax, to split this, is the residential rate going to go down? Is the increase going to effectively go down for residents? If we went to the tax to max, we'd be increasing it to 1.5. Residents would get to 10.77, and commercial would go up by 16.97. Then the other, so I've advocated and vacillated between 33, the 2/3, 1/3 model, or my more preferred model is raising the tide equally for both, trying to affect a rate that impacts each of them as a percentage the same. Now, one question I have for you, Steve, is in the documents you gave us, there is a wide delta between single family and condos that I had not seen such a delta before. Can you explain why that might be? And maybe I just didn't recognize that large delta.
When you say delta between
So if you look at your spreadsheets,
Yeah,
and I looked at, let's say we were at 1.4,
yep.
we're going to increase residential 14.77, but condos only 8.95. Why are condos valued at such a difference than a single family?
Well, I think the problem is averages.
Okay.
So you have, when you're using average as a comparison, and honestly, I don't know what a better comparison would be, but
Yep.
depending on the housing stock, you have, as the residential class grows, the builders are all building $1 million plus homes. So
okay.
but that is pulling up the average.
That makes sense.
Might be larger than if there was such a thing as the average home in Danvers. You know what I'm saying?
So the average condo is probably lower, obviously,
That's
than the
right.
average single family, but the average single family is inflated by the fact that we've got the McMansions.
Yes.
And those are my words, not yours.
That's my theory.
Okay.
So a question, residential, you have a structure and land.
Yep.
What do you do with the land on a condo when you do the assessment? Because the condo...
We don't tax land, we tax ownership interest. So, but the ownership interest takes into account their interest in the common areas.
The common area,
Which
but
would be
not the land.
Right, but the land is included in their ownership interest. So you
You do capture it.
You do capture it. It's just there's not if you look at a condo sheet, if you look at a condo record card and you hold the two side by side, the condo card, and you have a similar sizes. Honestly, if you looked at a townhouse that is a condo and it's freestanding, and you looked at a single family home of similar style, age, quality, locational desirability, they would be pretty close in value. And if you looked at the card, if you put the two cards next to each other, you'd see that the land line and the condo was 0, and all the value was allocated to the building and ownership interest. And if you looked at the residential card, you would see that there is a land line there. And in Danvers, it's about a 50-50 split generally. So you'd have about half the value would be in the land and about half the value would be in the building. But the end result is about the same value. It's just the way the state forces us to recognize those types of legal ownerships.
Thank you.
Do you have the next one?
Yep.
Yeah. Ethan, if you want, that's the one I'm referring to, just to let you know. So, and then the other undesirable option we never pursued was pay by consumption. The reality is, of the budget, businesses pay more in water rates, businesses pay more in electric rates and sewer rates. Businesses don't consume many of the benefits of recreation, the library, the senior center, and they certainly do participate and should in DPW, police, fire, those kind of. So if you were to try to measure consumption, I think you'd find that you far outweigh the consumption of the residents based on the consumption of the consumers. We don't even try to approach that. So if you kill those three, if you kill the 1.0 classification, the tax to the max, and consumption, you're left with staying where you are, doing a 2/3, 1/3 split, or doing the tide rises all boats equally. And I'm interested in hearing the other members, but that means if you think 2/3, 1/3, we're talking about a tax classification of 1.422. That's the pink line. And if you're thinking about raising the boats equally, then you're thinking about 1.447. And I'm interested in hearing what the other members are saying and following someplace there or in between.
Thank you, Gardner. David?
I think everything Gardner says makes an awful lot of sense. And we're in a bind every year of how to do this without hurting people, without offending people, and in an attempt to convince the taxpayers, commercial and residential, that we're trying to be fair. And I just don't know where on the scale, whether it's 14470, that does it or not. No matter what we do, taxes are gonna be slightly increased, people are gonna be angry, and I'm gonna continue to try to tell my tax-paying colleagues in this town that we need to constantly keep in mind that $1 billion worth of real estate in this town is tax exempt, which means of the $5 billion worth of property, who are the taxpayers, including me and all the other taxpayers in this room, we are subsidizing the exempt properties to the tune of 1/5 of what we pay. How that works out as far as a particular selection of factor tonight, I don't know. It seems to me equal change makes sense, 14470, and I wish that I could be more informed and more helpful, not just to the taxpayers, but to the other members of this board. And that's about as close as I can come to a fair guess at what we should do.
Thank you, David. Your input is always respected.
Thank you, Dan.
Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a topic that was 14 years ago way above me as far as understanding goes. We had some very astute individuals on the board at the time that understood this very well. I think that over the last 14 years, Gardner and I have learned a lot about this. We appreciate the variances. We've tried to be fair. And just as Steve has mentioned, I noticed for those last 14 years up there on the screen, we've kept it pretty close to, I believe, the 1/3, 2/3 ratio, which I feel is about as fair as you can be. Everyone's got to understand this is a totally inexact science. The commercial and industrial property isn't even assessed at with the same methods as residential is, and it's you're comparing apples and oranges and coming up with bananas. So I'm going to stick with what I've been doing the last 14 years and support the 2/3, 1/3, and I'll be supporting 1.4220. And thank you, Gardner, for extrapolating out those figures. Welcome.
Thank you. So I looked at all the work, and Steve was gracious enough to print out another sheet for me that at the end of the day I couldn't read. Print is too small, Steve. You added too many numbers in
The
there.
biggest paper we have.
So, but I was able to zoom in on 1.4468 to 1.4488. which I think is within the range of Mr. Trask, equal change. And it's a conflict because, like Bill, I like that 66-33 ratio. It's worked for many years, but I think this year I'm going to go with the equal changes, although a 12.85% increase is tough to swallow. But I would support the equal change, the 1.4470 that Selectman Trask has highlighted in green, and I did use green as well, Gardner.
And just to point out, at that, the split is 66-34. Yeah, so, and we're getting into real.
Right, really getting down
slicing the
into-
bread really thin.
Yep. So, if there's any other questions? Now, this is not advertised as a public hearing, but if anybody in the audience would like to make comments, I'm open to that. Mark, please.
I have to give up the podium. Gentlemen, it's another annual reunion of the selectmen and the residents and the business people, the landowners. Where are they? They're not here. I think you're absolutely right that this is a tough decision. And that decision, that ship has sailed 20 years ago. The problem that we have is that we're advertising this as a classification hearing. That's not what it is. It is to set the tax rate, whether it's classified or unclassified, for the spending that we've done in May of 2019. What we're doing is we're filling in that bucket that we already spent. Our problem is not the tax rate, our problem is spending. And as you may remember, at town meeting last year, I made that point that every penny that we spend at that town meeting is going to have to be raised in taxes. And here we are. We're raising taxes by significant numbers. We've raised water rates. We've raised application fees for building permits and everything else. So what we're doing is we're overspending our available tax receipts. We cannot live within the budget. So I understand that this is a very difficult decision, but it has, like Mr. Clark said, this has been going on for years. This is nothing new. But I think we need to equalize, because the taxes that are being paid by the commercial and industrial are real estate taxes. They're not business taxes. The misconception has always been that business community is going to be up in arms because they're going to pay more business taxes. That's not what it is. We're paying real estate taxes for the properties that are located on the land that we have in Danvers. So I appreciate where, the board is going, but it has to be equalized. The residents cannot take any more or any higher increases in taxes. Now, I've been preaching that for years. But the thing is, we have to start living within our budget. And we're taxed to the maximum right now because we cannot go over the levy capacity. And what we're doing, we're spending every single cent that we can get. The properties in Danvers are going up in value. The tax rate is going up in value. It doesn't seem to balance. So I appreciate where you're at, But the problem is that we have to be fair to both the residents and the commercial and industrial. Our commercial and industrial participates in the community, participates in the services that we provide. So there is a balance here. They may not be sending their kids to school, but they are using the roads, they're using the water and sewer, they're using all those services. So the thing is, I don't think you're too conflicted. We have to be fair. And the thing is, I don't know what fair is anymore, because we're overspending what we have available. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? Okay, so,
Mr. Chairman?
yes.
Mr. Zubrick raises a good point about the taxation, but I think that often that gets confused in this discussion is we're not raising the taxes. That was decided in May by the town meeting. They decided the budget. We're not deciding taxes tonight. We're not deciding how much we spend. We're not deciding what we're going to buy in the upcoming year. That was decided by town meeting, 149 of your representative members. What we're really doing tonight is, they ordered the meals in May, we're splitting the bill. That's really what we're doing. We're not going to affect the tax burden in any manner tonight. We're just saying what's the most equitable way to split the bill. And that often gets confused. I'm sure we're going to see it in social media. My taxes went up. Yes, your rate went up, and no matter what we do, your rate's going to go up. Even if we went to 1.50, your rate would go up over 10%, almost 11%. That is purely, and as Mr. Zubrick said, that's purely based on the fact that in May, we as a town, representatives said, we're willing to spend this much money. And so now we're just trying to decide, dinner's already been ordered, dinner's been served, now we're just splitting the bill at the end of the meal.
Yes, Mark?
I like the analogy about the dinner. That's a good analogy. However, now is the time for the Board of Selectmen to decide to cut back on the spending, because we cannot afford to pay any more in taxes, whether it's residential, condos, industrial, or commercial. We're getting overtaxed. And we have to start learning how to cut back and save some revenue that we are liable to receive. We have excess taxes from excise, from room and meals, and all that is being spent. We need to start cutting that now so we can reduce the rates for our residents.
Thank you. All right, gentlemen, we have to make 5 votes. First one is the selection of the residential factor. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move we set a residential factor for the fiscal year at 1.4470.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion?
Again, I think that people have expressed, the citizens have expressed, let's try to do it equally, fairly. It keeps us as close, it's a 66-34 split, as opposed to 66.6-33.3. And the rise to residentials will be 12.85, and the rise to business will be 12.84. They both rise the same amount, the same percentage. They both feel the effect, which, as we have seen by one of the previous charts, residential values are screaming upward compared to commercial, which are rising, but nowhere near the value. So we're normalizing the two of those. Even though my house is worth more than the business beside me, in relation, we're rising both the burdens equally. We're actually increasing the burden to the businesses more than their rate of increase. So I think if we're going to say that's the model this year is equitable change versus 66-33, then that's why I went with 14470.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Okay, what's the will of the board? We have a
Aye.
motion, it's been seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
3 to 1. Thank you. Open space discount,
Mr. Chairman, I move we do not adopt the open space discount.
is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none, thank you. Residential exemption,
Mr. Chairman, I move we do not adopt the residential exemption.
Second.
discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, none, thank you. Small commercial exemption,
Mr. Chairman, I move we do not adopt the small commercial exemption.
Second.
discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The last one is the vote to grant authority to the Board of Assessors Chairman to sign on behalf of the Board of Selectmen on the DOR Gateway.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Would you stay there for a moment? I have a couple of questions. Looking forward to next year
I just
already.
confirm 1.447.
Yes, 1.447.
Okay.
Oh,
Of course. Can't forget the fourth digit.
okay. So, given the rise in residential values and the outlook for values to continue, maybe stabilize a little bit, but not decrease, when do you think we'll be bumping up against 1.50?
We've actually started talking about that internally. So if whether it's next year or the year after, it's a formula that the Department of Revenue calculates. I think you can't exceed 60, you can't shift more than that 35% onto the commercial industrial base. But I'll be, over the next year, I'll be working with the Department of Revenue to go through the steps necessary if it looks like we're gonna need to open up the options for the selectmen. Doesn't mean they have to go above the 1.5, but at least the options are on the table, and you guys can analyze the
So
impact.
when I looked at the state website on CIP Shift, and they list each community, and it appears that they all have the ability to go to 1.50, is that correct?
Yes, 1.50 is what
So
is,
is that by a vote, or they can just do that by right?
no, you can do that by right. You can go out, so what you can go to 1.5 is to exceed the 1.5.
So there was 8 pages, then I couldn't count all the communities at 1 versus those who are above it. I don't know if
Yeah.
you know that figure or not,
No, I don't.
but I'd be interested in knowing how many are at 1, and then how many are over 1.50, i.e. Peabody, Salem, Lynn are all in the 1.7 something.
Mr. Chairman, I think you would need to look at the average commercial base as well for those 1.0 communities, because something that Chief Assessor and I were discussing is that if you don't have a commercial base above a certain percent, those are the those communities generally
So Newburyport
don't.
is at 1.0, would surprise me.
Right, that would be, I think, an outlier for what generally you see,
Right.
which would be small towns with very little commercial base. There's no, the downside in using a shift would be to cripple the commercial base because it's so
So
small.
we
to
can
begin with.
rephrase it, how many communities similar to Danvers with a commercial base? I know Duxbury has no commercial base to speak of, and other communities as well.
Yeah, I mean, the information is relatively easy to gather in the data bank, and I can put together something similar to this, not so much a history, but, you know, what
Well, just
the residential
looking
value
forward
is,
to
the
the future.
percentages.
I'd
and
like
the
to have
shifts.
that information before we do our tax classification meeting,
Sure.
so that we have that, because I think, as you say, we're going to be bumping up against 1.50 pretty quick.
And
Unless
just,
the
yeah.
market drops.
I don't want to state the obvious, but I think that the shift is a function of the relative values of your grand list, regardless of your tax levy. If the tax levy were cut in half, the shift would still apply because you're looking at the split between the residential and commercial. And I think what we saw, 10 years ago, it took the collapse of the housing market to reset the shift back down to 1.25, and it's worked its way back up.
Yep.
So, but I think we have been discussing at the staff level, because if the value, we've been averaging roughly 6% a year, and if that continues for another year or two, we will be at that, given the current policy direction from the board. So we can pull together some materials and come back and have a discussion.
Yeah, at some point in time before the end of November. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Are you all set?
I'm all set. If
Okay.
you got any more questions, no?
No, I don't think so, member of the
All right, great,
boards.
so I'll be back in like 5 minutes.
Yes.
Point of information. We dealt with this issue back in the 90s and early 2000s. The criteria is 1.5 is for towns, and 1.75 is for cities.
Thank you.
So if Danvers becomes a city, we can raise it up to 1.75.
Thank you for that clarification. Okay,
That's by state law.
thank you. Okay. With permission of the board, I'd like to take number 8 next, which is the board will vote to approve the town manager's fiscal year 2020 strategic major objectives.
Sure.
And Bill, would you like to start us off on that?
Didn't expect to be first, but I'll just say that,
Well, you must have 5 that you like.
well, I have one that I want to emphasize.
Did the board receive, Diane had provided some materials.
Yes, I received it.
Did you get hard copies of that tonight, or did you just get that by email?
No, I got this, Friday.
I printed it out.
Okay. You guys are welcome to look at
Oh,
this.
I didn't see this.
Would you like to make some copies?
Yeah, would you
Sure,
mind?
that'd be great.
I must have lost that in the,
I
you
didn't see
have it?
that.
I can look it up
You
here.
want my copy?
I can make some copies.
Do you have one?
This is
Okay, good.
all right.
Yep, thanks, Joe.
So we're supposed to have gotten a copy of this today, or?
I forwarded it.
Email?
I sent it out by email, but Joe's making some hard
Okay,
copies,
no,
just
okay,
for
no,
reference.
that's good. I'm glad to see this. because-
Danvers, we're on a momentary delay as the town clerk is making copies of the 5th Selectman's notes regarding this strategic major objective plan. And we appreciate all input from all members. Steve?
Keep them down? Sure.
Thank you. Bill, what I think I'd like to do is for everybody to kind of give us your top 5.
Yeah,
or
I've
6.
got one that I want to really push.
Sure.
And I've changed my mind on this a little bit since we talked the other week. It was something that I had overlooked in the past, and I brought up. I can speak to it now, really, if we're still
Sure.
all here. Okay. I'd like to have us really look hard at the consolidated DPU yard, and I don't think it should even be considered that as a DPU facility. Going back to the era of Newt Sweet, the town was looking for a consolidated DPW facility in town, and at that time, he had considered what's now the Gates Field, which was opposed by the neighbors.
Thank you.
The more I thought about this topic, about a DPW yard, the more, I don't know whether I should say I'm incensed, frustrated. We have regressed in this town. We're a pretty good town as far as planning for the future, but in this one factor, we have regressed almost 70 years in the last 10 years in what we have for facilities for the DPW. The DPW, our forefathers back in the early 1950s, late 40s, foresaw the need for a consolidated facility, and they built one on Hobart Street on an old dump that included equipment maintenance, highway department, forestry, and Grounds Division, Water and Sewer Division. They basically brought together all of the DPW, or what became a DPW, positions or departments except for building maintenance and electric. And that facility worked for quite a few years in a very good function of combining several of our DPW departments at one location, consolidation. I would equate it to what we've done with the voting, putting all the voting in one place and the efficiencies that are there with everyone voting at the one location at the high school. Certainly, if you wanted to have things done in town with the DPW, and this is before there was a DPW, there were individual divisions. You'd go to the water department with Vern Russell, you go to the highway department with Barney Ennis, you go to other departments with their other department heads, Clint King and the forestry, and they could get things done consolidatedly very well through the model that was put together by our first two town managers. Then slowly we started to slip away. As electric light expanded, someone in the early 60s, I think it was probably John Finocchio, had the great idea that they wanted to expand a facility across the street from where the electric light was. So they built that building on the mill pond, literally where David and I might have swum when we were kids with a rope swing going out there into the water. They built that building over the water, a part of the mill pond. And we have had at least 2 catastrophic losses in the last 10 years in that building, where the water flooded over, and not only flooded the lower level of that building, which it has barriers in it to go up 42 inches, I'm sorry. The only problem is the water level went up 48 inches, and it destroyed over $500,000 worth of inventory, supplies that were there for the electric light department. They have since built a new facility or a pad to place all of the wire they have inside the yard at a higher level so that it won't flood out. But it's an example of probably, if we look back in history, it was probably a short-sighted decision, but they built the facility they thought was going to be appropriate, and it's turned out to be a detriment in some ways. We've decentralized now the water and sewer division down on Canal Street, so they're no longer part of the Hobart Street section. Many years ago, we separated the Park and Recreation and Forestry Division and moved them down onto a piece of property that was almost useless for anything else because of its contamination on North Putnam Street. So we now have 7 locations around town that we're trying to run a department. Well, damn it, this town did a great job in the years that I've been a selectman, renovating 7 schools, renovating and improving our water treatment plant, renovating this building, which really wasn't a priority on everyone's list at one time, but Wayne thought he could sneak into $3 or $4 million to do so. And every time something's been done like this DPW facility has been put on the back burner. About 10 years ago or so, I think the first time I was a chairman, I approached the town manager in our weekly meetings and said, I really wish we could do what they've done out in Weston. Weston did a great facility along Route 20 out there, where their DPW was all put in one location. They could house all the equipment. All the divisions were all in a pretty close area. He said, yeah, but Bill, they spent $23 million to do that. It was expensive. They had to get an override to do it. All right? I accepted it and didn't say much more about it. But we're in a point now where we can't build on Hobart Street because it's polluted. They tried to do a retrofit of the salt shed several years ago, and they can't even legally dig a footing in there because it's all a dump, the old dump that we used to have there. Parcels of land in this town that are large enough to accommodate a DPW facility and are not impactful on a residential neighborhood are becoming less and less and less. We've got 2 major parcels in town right now that are probably going to be developed in the next several months that have been sitting beautifully open for years going back to colonial days. And we have the land on North Street and land on Pickering Street that are going to be developed very shortly, I'm sure, through the deaths of their landowners. So I think it's very important for us to look at this project as an ongoing project instead of trying to use the patchwork of little projects, because we don't know what's going to come down the road. In the last 4 years, we've had 2 multi-million-dollar projects that we had no plans for, the roof of the Highland School and the central heating system of the library. I am losing my support, I'm withdrawing my support, if you will, from the Hay Barn project at Glen Magna. I think it's way over, it's way over planned, it's way over expenses. There's no way that we should be able to afford a $3 million facility for a wedding venue. You've got to really look into this quite clearly. And I know that from this Topsfield Fair standpoint, we've spent well over $1 million. And what did we have last year, the second year? I think there was 8 weddings. We spent $65,000 promoting it, put on a show, had the building ahead of time, invested a lot of money in air conditioning. It's an expense that we really can't afford. We spent a large amount of money at the high school on athletic facilities that were above and beyond the original high school. It was budgeted originally. It was needed by the high school to keep it competitive with other high schools in the area. However, we should not be in the business of providing a wedding venue for the community, for people in town, and being in direct conflict, for example, with the Historical Society. They're going to be bankrupt if we open that up. If we run that, the town runs that with its resources. It's going to kill Endicott, Glen Magna. I also don't like the long-term liabilities that are attached to this for the potential need for extra staffing that's going to have to be hired to run these facilities, even if it's part-time. You're still going to have long-term costs for added personnel. So the bottom line, simply stated, I will be very, very strongly hoping to support the exploration into a consolidated DPW facility somewhere in town. And I would withdraw the support that I had for the hay barn as one of the top priority projects. Thank you.
Thank you. David, looking for some of the goals you'd like to see assigned to the town manager?
I like the list that we have. I don't want to just constantly piggyback on my old pal Billy Clark. With the hay barn from the beginning, I just think back of the days of the Village Green when all the wedding receptions in town were held in the private business, confines of either the Village Green or the King's Grant or something. And the hay barn has made me nervous from time. No, I think that this list is very good. I agree with Bill's comments on the hay barn. And also, if there is a piece of land that is susceptible to being a major headquarters for our Public Works Department, I don't know what, Pickering Street you mentioned, Bill?
That isn't big enough. That's just a parcel of land that is vacant at the present time and is in the middle of a residential neighborhood. I think one of the biggest criteria there is you want to get that yard away from residential neighbors as much as possible because of the noise that's caused by the equipment, especially in the winter during snowstorms. I know I'm a half mile away from the facility right now, and I still hear the backup alarms on the payloaders very heavily from the...
Well, how about the possibility of asking the state to assign some land to us for that purpose from either the North Shore Community College or Essex Aggie? Just one. What about asking the Mass General to assign a portion of that new open space up on Endicott Street and look for sources of land that are currently in other use or tax-exempt use, and go with hat in hand and say, this would really help the town and we need the help. So, but otherwise, as far as in between these particular objectives, they're all important. We've talked about them several times, and I'm all for trying to get exempt properties and other people, places, and things to pay their fair share and to participate in our needs for the entire community. Otherwise, I don't really have anything specific to say about the list.
Thank you. Gardner?
Thank you. So we've really got to take this bottom half of the sheet and cull down to 5 that we can agree on going forward. I read the Selectman Langley's had some good analysis, and I agree with a bunch of it. The complete the rezoning of Enhanced High Street, I think that's happening. That's well in play. I don't think that we have to. I don't think we need to make that a priority over some of these other ones. Same with negotiating the fair and sustainable contracts. That's a part of the role of town manager is to negotiate. That's the job, and I get it, why it's here, and I'm not saying it's not important. I'm trying to find 5 actionable things that are priority to me. So my first one is the third one down, complete feasibility and valuable testing the well site at Rebecca Nurse Homestead. I think that goes hand in hand with the DEP, but I want to keep those separate, and here's why. We can do one without the other. So I'm going to also circle that one, the work with key stakeholders to respond to draft DEP. I think those are 2 separate and distinct things. If we commingle them and one happens and the other doesn't happen, how do we rank the town manager? So the DEP is more of a long-term solution. Rebecca Nurse, we could have a more immediate answer, including maybe we can't do it, but I think that itself is a definable goal separate from the other one. So one of them is the Rebecca Nurse Homestead well. One of them is the work with key stakeholders on the draft DEP water permit renewal. Tonight is not the night to debate the hay barn, but I find a great amount of value in the hay barn. Some of the comments here, this would be a cost to the taxpayer of just over $2 million. $1 million has already been apportioned by the state and being used in that total $3 million number. And Glen Magna and the hay barn offer a different type of wedding venue, and I don't want to call it a wedding venue, it's a different type of function venue. Just like when people want to buy a car, some people want a luxury sedan, some people want a pickup truck. It depends on what your kind of venue is. And if I was going to have a high-end, real-class wedding or a high-end, real-class corporate event, I'm going to the Glen Magna. If I want something more rural and rustic, then I'm going to go to the hay barn. So I don't see that that's a competition there. That's on my list. I'm happy to support Bill in identifying options and considerations for the DPW yard. It's going to be it may be a multi-step process. We may have to acquire the land and wait for the building, but maybe lock in the land. My concern is trying to absorb too much debt on our current debt load. It's one of those things that we've been very cautious, and our financial team has done a really good job of normalizing the debt. As one comes off, another comes on, and we try to not create the spikes. So, and then the last one is encouraging and promoting affordable housing opportunities. It was suggested that could be combined with the first one about the High Street and Danvers Square. Again, that one is fait accompli. If that goes through, 40R happens. I want some more initiative. The Affordable Housing Trust was really pleased to present to the selectmen this year opportunities. It didn't pan out, and that's okay. Sometimes they don't because of the wetlands issue. But I want to continue to think that the town would help us pursue more affordable housing opportunities. So if they're listed, I want number 3, number 5, number 6, number 8, and number 9.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm keeping a little scorecard here,
Dan, before you go, could I just make one more?
please.
I just got Diane's comments, and so I've perused them. I haven't studied them. But before I read them, I was thinking something. Why are these goals at the bottom of the page? Why do we have to pick 5? And among other things, Diane kind of implicitly said that in that she said that some of them should be blended. I don't mean to make any more work for the town manager because he has a complete plate and he does it all beautifully. He does a phenomenal job with a phenomenal staff. And as far as culling this list down to 5, is that really something we need to do?
We don't want more than 5.
Well, if I could, all of the items on this list are things that staff will work on and continue to work on. Identifying the 5 that the board agrees sort of rise to the top are the ones that you base your evaluation of me for the year on. But that doesn't mean if the board chooses not to include fair and sustainable collective bargaining agreements as part of the top 5, that is still something that in the next couple of months, that's a process we're going to start.
That's
so
something you have to suffer through no matter what, no matter what we say. I mean,
dropping these off doesn't mean they go away.
No,
So,
okay,
yeah.
all right.
But thank you.
Did you have any other that you wanted to?
No, thank you.
Okay.
No, thank you, Dan.
So I'll just go through the list. I agree with the Gardner, the rezoning on High Street is going to happen quickly. We don't need to make that a goal. The contracts, that's Steve's job. We don't need to put that in as a goal. The well site at Rebecca Nurse Homestead I checked off as one of my items. Work with the key stakeholders to respond to draft DEP water permit I put as one of mine, as well as Diane and Gardner, so there's 3 on that one. I was going to say I don't share the enthusiasm for the hay barn, but I do share the comments about the hay barn made tonight. It's $2 million, it's more payroll, it's more staff. While I'm in favor of preserving the barn itself, adding the 2 wings and the kitchen, et cetera, I still don't see what the benefit to the residents and the taxpayers are. So I'm lukewarm to the hay barn, as others. I agree with the DPW, so you've got 4 people there. The one thing that Gardner's affordable housing opportunities, affordable housing is very important, but the building inspector has been quoted as saying will never fall below 10%. I would never say never, ever.
Yeah.
However, the likelihood of us falling below 10% with the 2020 census is very unlikely. So I don't think we need to have the town manager working on affordable housing. I think the Affordable Housing Trust has a good grasp, and they can work with the High Street project and help create more affordable housing there. We were beneficial on Locust Street getting units there, so I think your committee can work on that without having the town manager work on that. Now, the work towards development of a clean energy and climate plan, it's something I've been talking about since January. Diane thinks we should let the legislature do that. So an example, and I had written down 5 examples, but I'll just one. It took 100 cities and towns to pass a bylaw to ban plastic bags before the state legislature attempted to pass a law, and they still haven't been able to do that. We can't really wait for the legislature to develop a climate energy plan. Every year we go by without doing something to curb greenhouse gases, puts us behind the 8 ball even more. And I would ask that if we adopt the development of clean energy and climate plan, that we work to cut municipal energy use, not a pledge, but work to cut it by 20% in 5 years, provide as-of-right sitting in designated areas for renewable energy, simplify and expedite permitting for new clean energy facilities, could be the DPW facility, purchase fuel-efficient vehicles for municipal departments, work on a general community vision which will help the town understand the direction that the community should go in the future, develop a baseline climate change and natural hazard vulnerability assessment, and prioritize actions for dealing with natural hazards, of which we seem to get our fair share of. Incentivize low-impact development, increase conservation efforts, and seek alternative transportation projects. I feel very strongly that this should be a long-term goal for the community, and working with other communities to work on energy reduction, cutting down on greenhouse gases. Then maybe the state will find its way to help the cities and towns achieve these goals. So I'm very strongly in favor of putting that long-term goal into the town manager's goals to be worked on going forwards.
So if I might, Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
we had a list of 9.
Yep.
I'm hearing that there's not going to be a support for the hay barn, so take that off. I'm hearing that that at least a number of us agree that the rezoning to enhance High Street is
The first 2 are
the first 2 are off.
needless.
Right, that they're important work, just not necessary to be highlighted as a goal of the town manager specifically. And if we take the affordable housing opportunities off, and I understand we can do our work and continue to do our work as a trust. I don't want to put weight on the 2020 census, we continue to work independent of that. That was one goal. Another goal is just getting affordable housing, not low income, but affordable for the sake of getting a young citizenry back into town.
Well, I would hope you'd work on low income as well.
Oh, it will. I'm just saying it's not only focused on that. Which leaves, if we knock those 4 off, leaves 5 that certainly I could support, which is complete the feasibility, viability of testing a well site at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead, work with the Danvers alarm list to secure a conservation restriction, work with the key stakeholders on the draft DEP, work to develop a clean energy and climate plan, and identify options about the DPW. Just by the course of the conversation, I'm hearing that's the way it's falling out, and I could support the remaining 5.
Anybody else, any comments? Those all right with you, David? Bill?
I would agree with them, yeah.
Okay, thank
Yeah, just comment. I think, if I heard, I just want to clarify what, I think I heard correctly. So we are, within the next month, we're going to be having our all-day workshop for our municipal vulnerability planning grant. And that, the data we collect with that will lead into the process I think you're describing. And I think that the items that you just listed probably would form the bones of a climate action plan. So I think that makes sense. And I think as written, that works, because the work that we're doing now would sort of dovetail in. And this the guidance in terms of the climate planning and the public works yard are timely, because we're at the beginning of the budget process. So I'll have an opportunity to speak with the department heads about anything that we may want to consider over the next 18 months in terms of support to really evaluate these things. So I would also be in agreement with the objectives.
Okay. All set? Okay, thank you. Pass that down to Steve so he can just put it in his notebook. Okay, that took a lot of time, a lot of work. Thank you all. Selectmen new business. Anyone have any new business to bring up tonight? David?
We think, I guess I'm kind of a liaison to the housing, the senior center, and once again, we have this wonderful monthly men's dinner. Diana always says, can she come? Well, yes, she can come. But we had one last night, and it was a wonderful little presentation on identity theft and cybersecurity. And it's always a wonderful get-together, and the next dinner is on December 17th, and I recommend that any old men over the age of 30 consider coming and attending the dinner. It was great. Also, the Inclusion and Human Rights Committee will have its monthly meeting Thursday this week up in the town manager's office. Everybody is welcome. We don't have a great turnout, but there are some very dedicated people part of that committee, and we're talking about relevant new stuff. And so everybody should be welcome to, and I hope, be interested in the work of that committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Gardner, new business?
Couple of things. I think we all received an email regarding one of our Danvers housing buildings, and I got it early and forwarded it to the town manager, so for their consideration. As far as committee assignments go, tomorrow night is the open meeting for the Affordable Housing Trust, and Thursday is the open meeting for the River Committee. They're posted, and people are obviously welcome to join us. I think that the River Committee and the Recreation Department, unfortunately, there was some unfortunate news, which is that Santa by Sea is canceled this year. It's a combination of many things, including that program was privately funded with donations, and the donations were considerable. The person who went and got the donations and sought that doesn't have the ability to do so with the same amount of effort, and it's going to collide with the tree lighting. So it's difficult to spread town resources and volunteer resources between 2 programs on the same exact day for the purpose of celebrating the holidays and seeing Santa. So with regret that's happening, and I think it's out there. At our last meeting, we heard from citizens recommending the renaming of the senior center, and we took a position to ask the town manager to create a warrant article to that effect. Based on some of the comments I've seen on social media and people calling me, I think that it may require a bit more than a single night's review of warrant articles. I think there has been, I don't want to call it unintended consequences. I think there has been points of view that may not have gone into the factor into the thinking of the people who brought this to our attention. And I'm way, way, way behind honoring Wayne in some manner. And I'm not shying away from necessarily the senior center, but things that have come up that should be considered are, if we change this to a community center, people are concerned about how that affects the seniors. This is a location that seniors have embraced and has an identity in that manner. And I'm not suggesting it shouldn't be a community center. I'm suggesting we need to have more in-depth discussion about how changing the community center affects that, and whether we need an independent community center. I think we do need a community center. That, and also, you know, other names came up in that may be more appropriate for the senior center, which would be Mary Kelly or some others. I'm not advocating for anything other than when we prepare the warrant article, we prepare possibly a public workshop for that discussion, because I think that's going to be, there's going to be more input than we had at the presentation and suggestion. I just want to plan accordingly and make sure everybody has an adequate time to have their say. Other than that, I don't have anything. Thank you.
Bill?
New business?
Yeah.
Is this going to be the last item as well?
No, just anything new that we haven't discussed before.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, we have to come back afterwards?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll wait till the end.
Good, thank you. Town manager will report to the board on various items of interest.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Steve's timing is impeccable. No sooner had the board voted that I think he started to question the percent tax increases that we were discussing in terms of what the impact on the budget and the shift would have on the average tax bill. And he went back and looked, and so the shift itself is fine, but I think the impact is overstated, and we want to make sure that we both clarify that here tonight, and then also.
You might have to revote on the shift.
Sure. So why don't you go ahead and walk through what you found?
If you want to keep the tides raising equally.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I typed in the wrong single-family average value.
Ah,
I thought that's what you corrected.
Well, what it was is I corrected the property tax bill, which was right originally, and it wasn't the rate that was wrong, it was the value that was wrong, so my apologies for that.
so if we embrace the equal, okay,
This is
that's the full sheet.
this is the whole thing here?
That's the whole kit and caboodle. All right.
So it's the last, I believe what you're looking for is on the last page.
Just give me the last page.
You got some forest land up in Maine you've purchased in?
I do.
Oh, wow, yeah. That is a dramatic difference. Okay, yes.
This is the last two pages. This first.
And then where do we get to? 66.6. Then actually, yeah, it's not on the last page, it's on the page before the last
Right.
page. So, Mr. Chairman, if I might,
Please.
if we adopt a model of 66.6, 33.3, we're talking about a factor of, in the neighborhood of 14240. If we so that's a third of the way up the second to last sheet. If we adopt the tide rises all boats equally, we're talking over a factor of 14006, or thereabouts, then the increase is 9.28 and 9.21. So, just so we don't have to get into the hundredths, thousandths of a percentage, if I might, I would recommend that we continue the adoption of 1.40. Which would which would be an increase to the to the single home of 9.28, condos of 8.95, and businesses of 9.16.
So that's in keeping with your motion to keep it equal, you've just
My
changing the numbers.
philosophy of equality, yes, rising everybody as equal as possible, that's in that. If people want to adopt the philosophy of 2/3, 1/3, you'd be talking about 14240. If it's appropriate for me to make a motion, just to start the discussion.
Well, I think we probably need to amend the original motion.
Can I do that?
You can do that.
Okay, I'd like to amend the motion for the sake of discussion that we adopt a tax classification of 1.40.
Second.
Discussion? None needed, I don't think. Bill?
No, I'm glad to see the number come down a bit. I couldn't understand why it was so high.
So we just saved the taxpayers some money
Yeah, we did,
on their tax bills.
yep.
I'm going to call him.
Do we need to change that paperwork?
So I think Steve went to reprint the documents.
Do you have that paperwork that we signed?
He's got it.
He's got it? So you're gonna rip that one up? Thank you. So we have a motion that's been amended. All in favor of the amendment?
Aye,
Aye, thank you. So the main motion is the 1.40, correct?
yes.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None, thank you.
Mr. Clerk, it's 4.4-0 rather than 3-1.
Yep. On the
The new-
second.
Yep.
Yep, thank you.
We're probably now yet another year away from the 1.5. So
Wonderful.
We'll still come back and report out
We're going to be
on,
able to change our name to Salem when we do that.
we'll come back and report out on some comparables.
We'll have a few more vacant lots.
All right, so I guess, Steve, it's your turn.
I ceded my time to Mr. Poulos, so I'm all set tonight, thank you.
Thank you. Correspondence, new business update,
I'm sorry, I did have one item.
go ahead.
I spoke too soon. Just as a note, we had discussed this previously, but I wanted to remind the board that we will be reviewing the warrant for the February town meeting at our first meeting in January. So I'd be recommending that we close that warrant on Friday, the 13th of December at noon to allow for time to prepare the materials ahead of the holidays and get those out to the board for the first week in January. And while we're discussing counters, the recommendation is that we would use our regular meeting of January 6th to begin the warrant review, and if it worked out to hold Thursday the 8th as an overflow night, that would allow us to move the warrant to the Finance Committee the following week and have time for the workshop. The 14-day window, and to have time to do our workshop with town meeting as we did last time around on a Saturday.
Dates again, Steve.
So the warrant would close at noon on Friday, the 13th of December, and we would be planning to do our warrant review on January 6th, with Thursday, the 8th, as an overflow if we don't finish the work on the 6th. And then just as a reminder, the planning board's going to be reviewing the zoning at their meeting on the 26th of November, and so they're still on track to make a referral to the Board of Selectmen for the first meeting in December, which would then be referred back to the planning board and allow them to hold their public hearings as required under law to keep the town meeting timeline intact.
All set?
And we'll send that out, we'll send those dates out, but I just wanted to mention them tonight.
You all set, Steve?
Yes, thank you.
Bill?
In my role as remembering long-term town employees that have passed, I'd like to bring to the attention of the community that our longtime superintendent of buildings and grounds, Mr. Reginald Berry, passed away last week. Reggie was a great person in getting the town into a private pay or private contractor operations with a lot of the building maintenances in town. That was a big task he had after 2.5 when they're trying to save money. Reggie was also a great friend and had a great humor and worked very diligently with the now destroyed Holton Richmond and, the Dunn wing of the Danvers High School. That was a major project that he worked on in a long time.
Thank you. All set?
Yep.
Gardner?
I commingled mine, and I'm sorry for it.
That's okay. David?
Dan, could I just ask, there was a communication concerning one of the Danvers Housing Authority projects, and is that under, getting attention?
There was an email that the town manager received, and we did reappoint Wayne Eisenhower to that board on request of Pam.
Yeah, but what I'm referring to is, you and I think we all got a copy of an email from a resident of one of the projects complaining about conditions and non-response, et cetera. And I'm sure that's being looked into by the manager.
Well, the chairman responded to the email, and he and I will follow up with
Sure.
the authority to
Yep,
ensure
thank you.
that that's resolved.
Well, I thanked the resident for the input and told her there was a lot to digest, and I needed to get a better understanding of the role of the Board of Selectmen in regard to the DHA, and that's what the town manager and I will speak on when we meet.
you.
We
Yep.
haven't met to discuss that yet, but will. Thank you for bringing that up.
Make a motion, we accept the consent calendar.
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, thank you. Question to the clerk. There's only one secondhand article on here. Usually there's half a dozen of them.
Mr. Chairman, you find those on the consent calendar as we receive them back for renewal. So
So we're waiting on
you
others.
can expect to see a consent calendar for the next handful of Board of Selectmen meetings as the renewals come back. But usually on the Chapter 10 secondhand bylaw licenses and the renewals, we have a communication back and forth with Lieutenant Sullivan at the police department, because that's been his area of expertise over the last few years that we've relied on. So, as I say, that list, you'll see that list with varying degrees and amounts of license renewals over the next
Okay,
next
thank you,
month.
just curious, thank you. So we approve the consent calendar. I do want to read something from the Mass Government Enforcement Division, ABCC, page, talking about the impact of public safety and quality of life in Massachusetts through effective alcohol law enforcement. And the goal of the Enforcement Division, it is the overall goal of the Enforcement Division to impact public safety and the quality of life in our communities through effective alcohol law enforcement strategies to reduce alcohol-related crimes and traffic crashes. This division has established effective enforcement programs, often working in cooperation with municipal and state police to address alcohol-related problems in communities throughout the Commonwealth. My comment would be that I don't think that the ABCC, and help me, what are the commissioners? There's 3 commissioners? 3 commissioners appointed by the treasurer. I think they ought to read this and be reminded of it when Mr. DeLuca appears before them. I don't think they have that policy. They don't take it to heart. I did get another comment from a neighbor down on McDougal Ave. They like to walk downtown, and they take their life in their hands as a pedestrian trying to get through the High Street interchange. Pedestrian problem, so I had a problem the other day, and it's not the first time.
That's at River Street and River and...
Yeah, well, she walks up
By
to
the
High
diner.
Street. Yeah, from the diner. She comes up there. I wouldn't tell her not to walk that route, but she says it's dangerous.
I guess if you're coming from McDougal Avenue,
Mr.
you
Chairman,
want to go downtown.
we have, through the Public Works Director, requested a sit-down with the DOT as we did several years ago. It would be a similar setup, daytime workshop. We'd invite a number of the selectmen, representatives from police and engineering and the different departments to have a conversation about the persistent issues that we're having with most of our interchanges coming off of 128.
Thank you very much. Okay, so with that, if you see a veteran, thank them for their service, past veterans, current veterans. And with that, could we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good night, Danvers.